Hello, A-Push people. Welcome to week 3 of A-Push tutoring. And this week we are focusing on chapter 4 in the A-Push textbook, Imperial Wars and Colonial Protests. And we started out with this unit in week 1, and then we backtracked a little, and now we are back again. So we are actually going to start by talking about the Proclamation of 1763, and that's where we begin today's lesson. In an effort to stabilize the western frontier, the British government issued a proclamation that prohibited colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains. The British hoped that limiting settlement would prevent further hostilities between colonists and American Indians. But the colonists reacted to the proclamation with anger and defiance. After their victory in the 7 Years' War, colonies hoped to reap benefits in the form of access to Western land. For the British to deny such benefits were infuriating. Defying the prohibition, thousands settled westward. So, the whole basis of French and Indian War, the colonists really helped the British defeat their enemies and settle a bunch of that land, and the colonists hoped for a little good faith in return. And what happened? The British government did not give them that good faith and prohibited them from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains, which they so desired. So, this made the colonists angry. The Proclamation of 1763 was the first of a series of acts by the British government that angered the colonists. From the British point of view, each act was justified as proper method for protecting the colonial empire and making the colonists pay their share of costs for such protection. From the colonists' point of view, each act raised an alarming threat to their cherished liberties and long-established practices of representative government. So we have started on the road that leads to the revolution. The 4 acts we are going over today are the Sugar Act, Quartering Act, Stamp Act, and Declaratory Act. So the Sugar Act. This act, known as the Revenue Act of 1764, placed duties on foreign sugar and certain luxuries. Its chief purpose was to raise money for the crown, and a companion law also provided for stricter enforcement of the Navigation Acts to stop smuggling. Those accused of smuggling were to be tried in courts by crown-appointed judges without juries. So crown-appointed means by the British Crown. So this placed a tax on foreign sugar and other luxury items. The Quartering Act. This act is pretty simple. It allowed British soldiers to be housed in private citizens' homes. So a British soldier can knock on my door right now and I would have to house them. That is why we have the Third Amendment. No quartering of soldiers. It comes from this act. The Stamp Act was the biggest act. In an effort to raise funds to support military forces in the colonies, Lord Grenville turned to a tax long in use in Britain, the Stamp Act, enacted by Parliament in 1765, required that revenue stamps be placed on most printed papers in the colonies, including all legal documents, newspapers, pamphlets, and advertisements. This was the first direct tax collected from those who used the goods paid by the people in the colonies as opposed to the taxes on imported goods. So direct tax means the colonists are paying for it directly. People in every colony reacted with indignation to news of the Stamp Act. A young Virginia lawyer named Patrick Henry spoke for many when he stood up in the House of Burgess to demand that the king's government recognize the rights of all citizens, including the right not to be taxed without representation. So this term is going to be thrown around because the colonies were not represented in the parliament. No taxation without representation means you can't tax us because we are not represented in your government. In Massachusetts, James Otis initiated a call for corporate action among the colonies to protest the Stamp Act. Representatives from 9 colonies met in New York in 1765 to form the so-called Stamp Act Congress. They resolved that only their own elected representatives had the legal authority to approve taxes. The protest against the Stamp Act took a violent turn with the formation of the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, a secret society organized for the purpose of intimidating tax agents. Members of this society sometimes destroyed revenue stamps and tarred and feathered revenue officials. Boycotts against British imports were the most effective form of protest. It became fashionable in the colonies in 1765 and 1766 for people not to only purchase any article of British origin. Faced with a sharp drop in trade, London merchants put pressure on Parliament to repeal the controversial Stamp Act. So did it work? Did it not work? Boycott seemed very popular in the colonies. and we start to see revolution thinking ideas. So the Declaratory Act. The Declaratory Act, we are in the last act. In 1766, Greenville was replaced by another prime minister, and Parliament voted to repeal the Stamp Act. When news of the repeal reached the colonies, people rejoiced. Few colonists at the time noted that Parliament had also enacted a face-saving measure known as the Declaratory Act. The act asserted Parliament had the right to tax and make laws for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. This declaration of policy would soon lead to renewed conflict between the colonists and the British government. So, first off, they stepped back from the Stamp Act, which the colonists was happy about because they boycotted the Stamp Act. So they repealed the Stamp Act, but they issued what was known as the Declaratory Act, which means the British government could tax the colonies in all cases whatsoever. As you can imagine, this made the colonies very mad, and it reinforced the conflict between them and the British government, which we will see more in the next lesson on Wednesday.